given that this is a two-part act, I'm just going to hold on to this mic and let Andy Stevens take the static one. Saul, thank you very much for the invitation, and I think on the agenda, we're Lena. Lena's in Peru, so it took two of us to replace her. Just a little bit more about Twin, and then I'll hand over to Andy for a few slides. For those of you who don't know Twin, we're best known, I think, for establishing Cafe Direct, Divine Chocolate, introducing fair trade fruit to UK under the OK brand, and most recently Liberation Foods. It's a fair trade nut company. And much of the work that we talk about here is in relation to our work trying to establish fair trade nut supplies for retail sale in Europe. We're a charity, Twin, and we have a for-profit trading company. Our work with coffee and cocoa and fruit and now nuts is all about working in the value chain and using our trading experience to try and understand where the constraints are within that value chain. And I think if you are a supporter of fair trade, you'd know that originally you wouldn't have bought the coffee for the quality. And what we have been focusing on over the last 15, 20 years is improving the quality. And we're doing similar work with nuts, trying to identify constraints within the chain. And we're going to talk a little bit about Malawi and groundnuts as one of the value chains that we're working on. Andy.
Good afternoon, everyone. As a former teacher, I know how rowdy people can get on a Friday afternoon, so I will be keeping my eye out for you at the back. Just what I'm going to do quickly is give a introduction to Malawi, a sort of the nutritional context we're talking, and also a little bit of background on peanuts, groundnuts, and then also one of the major issues that we're trying to tackle. So Saul's actually managed to steal one of my pieces of information already, but I've got some more, so it's fine. Okay, so one of the problems in Malawi is that the current diets, 86% of the diets come from energy foods such as cereals, tubes and roots. And things like legumes and other pulses aren't actually being eaten enough to get the good nutrition that's required from there. As Saul said, 1.6 million people in the lean period, so between December and March this year, they were in need of assistance. And that's 8 times higher than it was in 2011. So the main reasons behind this seem to be some erratic rainfalls at the beginning of the season. So it goes to show how a little bit of change in climate can actually have a massive impact on the number of people who are in need of help. And I think one of the most striking figures that we're working on at the moment is that across Malawi, 46% of the children under 5 are stunted, and it's 21% of the children under 5 are severely stunted. And this is not only shocking for now, but also it sort of gives an idea of the challenge that Malawi faces in the future, because recent research suggests that the effects of malnutrition, they're going to last for 3 generations. So even if we were to put in a program which is working now, it's still a problem which is going to have to require a lot of work in the future. Okay, so a little bit of background on groundnuts. So as the name may suggest, groundnuts grow in the ground, but as the name might not suggest, it's actually a legume. So groundnuts are actually, apparently 1.5 billion people worldwide use groundnuts as their primary source of protein. So it is a very, very valuable crop globally. In Malawi, groundnuts is considered a woman's crop. We are doing work to better understand what this means at the moment, but what we understand from this is it's a crop that women would choose to grow for its nutritional value. And also, the women do the majority of the work. So from planting to work in the field, harvesting, and the shelling, which we'll talk about a bit later, the majority of the work is done by women. In Malawi, roughly, if you're a groundnut farmer, you might plant in the region of 0.4 hectares, and that's likely to give you a yield of about 300 kilograms of nuts. What we think at the moment is roughly 70% of these nuts are being sold, whether mostly into informal markets, and then the smaller majority is being kept at home, where it's used for domestic consumption, and it's quite often turned into a flour, which is sprinkled over other relishes to add some nutrients and some protein into the food. And specifically, Malawi, historically, it's the world's most, its economy is the world's most dependent on tobacco. So until recently, 70% of the exports from Malawi came from tobacco. And due to the lack of demand now, or falling demand for tobacco, what we're finding is the Malawian government are trying to find other cash crops which can help fill the gap left by tobacco. And groundnuts has been promoted as one of these crops. But one of the major problems we're having, linking to the safety and the quality issues I talked about before, is an issue of aflatoxin. Can I just, out of interest for me, can I just have another hands up? Who's heard of aflatoxin? Excellent. Okay. So hopefully this slide will be a pretty quick one to run through. So it's between 4.5 and 5 billion people who have chronic risk to aflatoxin worldwide. And I'm sure you're all aware of the sort of the health impacts. So from immunosuppression, sort of linked to hepatitis and HIV. It's responsible for up to 28% of all liver cancer worldwide. So each year, about 155,000 people are getting liver cancer as a result of being chronically exposed to aflatoxin. And as we're talking about sort of a link to nutrition and malnutrition here, aflatoxin in the diet is being heavily linked to stunting. And recent research from Togo and Benin suggests that aflatoxin levels in bloods of children under the age of 5 could be 40 to 40% higher than those in children of a normal body size. Let me just see if I have anything else.
I'd just like to say that 4.5 to 5 billion people is linked to the fact that aflatoxin is a contaminant of crops like maize, and although we're focusing on groundnuts, there's a significant number of people around the world who are exposed to aflatoxin at some time in the year.
And then, so as Andrew said previously, part of our work is trying to encourage groundnuts produced in Malawi and other areas around the world to be able to meet the safety standards imposed by the EU and other markets. And it's been I think there's a World Bank report which suggested that each year Africa loses out on about $750 million because their nuts, their dried fruit and some of their cereal crops aren't able to meet the aflatoxin standards. So this is sort of thinking about the food safety of the developed world, but it's not necessarily thinking about the food safety of the people who are exposed to this crop or these crops all the time during their normal diet. So just on the food security sort of note here, I'm sure you've all seen this definition before, and it's something that we like to show because we think that whilst the definition recognises food safety, once you actually start to look into lots of literature or many programs away, sort of even though food safety might be referenced early in the document, quite often when it's looking at a definition of food security, there's often a lack of mention of food safety later on. And a lot of our work in Malawi is looking at how we can improve food safety for export markets, but also for local markets. So I'll just give a very brief overview of some of the work we're doing in Malawi at the moment. So through a couple of reports from various donors, we've been asked to look at the value chain and highlight key points in the food systems where there's a chance of aflatoxin, so produced by a fungus, Aspergillus flavus, which is soil-borne. So right from the very start, when you plant a seed, that could be contaminated with the fungus and cause the contamination. So we're looking across the entire chain to understand where the fungus is posing a threat and trying to look at what we can do to reduce that threat, but also just not looking at export markets, but trying more and more now to understand how local food systems and informal food systems can also, we can tackle the issue of aflatoxin there. And one of the ways that we're now starting to look at this issue is actually encouraging targeted food loss. So food waste and food loss are sort of buzzwords around at the moment. And so food loss, the way we see food loss is it's food that was originally destined for human consumption and is being moved elsewhere. Now people might be asking, well, are you crazy? Are you you show me the figures. You've got people who are there, 46% of children's fibre are stunted. People aren't getting enough legumes and nuts. Why are you trying to pull the nuts away from their consumption? And it's for the issue of aflatoxin that we think this is very important. But the real challenge there is there's no point in just pulling the product away from human consumption. You need to make sure you're, in order for that to happen, you need to provide a pull. So what we're trying to do is look at viable value chains, which add some economic value to the nuts, even if it is contaminated, so that there's actually smallholder producers have got an incentive not to eat it themselves, but to actually to sell it into a value chain, which is going to get them some money at some point. I'm going to pass over to Andrew, who's going to talk about these two approaches in a little bit more detail.
I don't expect you to try and read all of this, but we've recently done some work for USAID, the South African Trade Hub, which is a regional trade facilitation program, and also for DFID Malawi. And what we've been doing is looking at the value chains and where aflatoxin becomes a problem within those value chains. And we've done a lot of detailed work around the different value chains. What I'd just like to point out is that when we started this work 10 years ago, we were focusing on this area here, this bottom left-hand corner. Sorry, right-hand corner from your perspective. And what we're now looking much more at is what's happening closer to the farm. So, as I discussed earlier, what our approach is to try and improve the quality of the product that we deliver to the market in Europe. And what that has enabled us to do is to identify that actually the key issue that we should be looking at is not about trying to increase the amount of product that's exported, but to look at food safety for those people who are actually producing the crop. So we're now starting to look much more closely at interventions within the country. Now, one of the things that we've done is we've set up a business called Afrinut, which is a peanut processing plant. And one of the things that we were trying to do with Afrinut was to provide a peanut paste that we could supply to Valid for the ready-to-use therapeutic food. The key challenge there is that aflatoxin is regulated by the UNICEF quality standards. WFP and others, when they're purchasing crops that are locally sourced, will put quality standards in order to produce a safe product. But what in effect that does is it pushes the problem further up the chain, closer to the farmer. And so what we are looking at is how to work a little bit closer to the farmers. So over the last 10 years, the sort of things that we've been focusing on have been trying to improve storage, looking at issues to do with how aflatoxin is introduced into the crop. And one of the key areas is around hand shelling. In order to get the peanut out of the nut, most of it is hand shelled. What is it? 4 billion hours roughly a year are spent in Africa, largely by women, just hand shelling. It is a really tedious, laborious, and hard on the thumbs. What happens is people wet the shell. By wetting the shell, you introduce moisture, you provide the right environment for the fungus to grow. But changing from hand shelling to mechanical shelling has implications in terms of control of the product from household into a more formal system. So part of the work that Andy was talking about is trying to understand, if you change the system, what are the implications? And similarly, sorting the product. For the export chain, we do need to meet the European standards, which are less than 4 parts per billion of aflatoxin. So the product needs to be clean before it leaves the country. But wherever the sorting occurs, you're left with contaminated nuts. And if you are encouraging farmers to sort out their nuts to provide a paste for, let's say, WFP or ready-to-use therapeutic food, there is a question about what happens to the product that is sorted. So as I say, we are focusing on quality management systems, looking at drying, shelling, sorting, and what we're finding is farmers are not drying the product properly, they're not sorting it properly. Most of the trade goes into the regional trades up into Zambia, DRC, where there aren't regulations. There is now a partnership for aflatoxin control, and they're trying to harmonise standards. But the informal trade at the moment has next to no mechanism to encourage them to look at quality. So we are looking at small-scale hand shellers, mechanical shellers. And what we are trying to do, as Andy said earlier, is to try and find ways of pulling aflatoxin out of the food chain. So deliberately trying to establish food chains that target the product that everyone else doesn't want. So what you have is the good nuts, and the poor quality nuts. The good products end up going into edible processing, but what we think we need to do is to focus on the non-compliant kernels. It's possible to produce edible oils so that you can filter the protein out, pull the aflatoxin out of the chain. It's possible to put the meal into animal feed, but you do need to detoxify it. And I'll pass over to Andy again.
So that's some of the sort of on-the-ground things we're looking at to have an impact on food security within Malawi. And I think it was earlier this year at the UN Sustainable Development Summit that Ban Ki-moon, he came up with the Zero Hunger Challenge. And one of his main, one of the core challenges there was all food systems are sustainable. Now I'm not sure that Ban Ki-moon's ever heard of a smart target, but that seems like quite a big challenge there. But it did have a few more things to add. So 100% access to adequate food all year round, and zero stunted children less than 2 years old. What we think is that at the moment, if food safety continues to be seen as a minor part of food security, then it'd be very, very hard to actually achieve these targets at all. Recent research by ICRISAT in Zambia and Malawi shows that quite often groundnuts and maize at the household level is having aflatoxin levels in the hundreds and then sometimes the thousands. So you've got a toxin in the local diet which is impacting on stunting, impacting on malnutrition. So what we'd like to see is a wider recognition in definitions, but also in actions of safe. So we'd like to say access to adequate safe food all year round. And as it says there, really get the idea of food safety as part of food security as being very important. Two of the other 5 challenges were to increase smallholder productivity by 100% and limit and reduce loss and waste of food. And what we believe is that they're both fantastic targets, but you've got the 100% increase in smallholder productivity. The current systems at the moment, as we've sort of talked about, are struggling to produce the adequate safe food for people at the household level. If you are to increase the productivity by twofold, 100% again, without thinking about the systems, you're going to have a similar problem again. You really need to have a systems approach to this. Think about storage, think about how the product moves through the supply chain. Because you might, if you're producing more, you are probably likely to get more which can reach export, and you've got a larger amount of safe food, but you're also going to have a lot of unsafe food there as well. So a final sort of recommendation that would be to look at the use of non-compliant food. So if you've got dangerous nuts, dangerous maize, to really think about how this can be pulled away from local consumption. Final thought is the we are in a sort of a time at the moment when there's a lot of focus on nutrition, on food security, and I think it's a great thing. It's going to continue. We do really think it's very, very important to get the issue of food safety as a bigger part in this. Sort of linked back to what I said earlier, the effects of malnutrition. They span 3 generations. So it's especially somewhere like Malawi, you've got 46% of the future generation are going to be stunted. So that's a big issue you need to tackle. And I guess the real question is, how do we break the cycle? And we believe that improving quality at local food levels is very, very important. Thank you very much.